There is a moment, and if you have ever loved someone completely, you know exactly the moment I am describing. When the ordinary stops being ordinary. When the Tuesday morning coffee and the sound of someone's key in the lock and the specific weight of a hand on your back in the dark stops being background noise and becomes, suddenly and without warning, the most precious thing you have ever been given. The thing you would trade every other thing to keep. Most people never get the warning. Most people move through their ordinary Tuesdays and Wednesdays and Thursdays without once understanding that they are standing inside the thing they will one day grieve the most. Most people only understand what they had after it is already gone, after the silence where a sound used to be becomes the loudest thing in the room. Helen Kang was given the warning, and what she did with it, what they all did with it, every person in that family that love had built from rain and park benches and doors open to strangers, became the final and most important chapter of a story that had never, not once, gone the way anyone planned. Which is perhaps why it went so beautifully. The unplanned things so often do. It was a Wednesday. The most ordinary Wednesday in the history of ordinary Wednesdays. The kind that asks nothing of you. The kind that simply moves through its hours without drama or announcement. Nana Ji Young had eaten breakfast with the focused destruction of a 14-month-old who had recently discovered that dropping things was not an accident, but an art form, a means of expression, a way of announcing herself to the world. A tiny philosophy of cause and effect practiced with great enthusiasm on every spoon within reach. Helen had cleaned up the third spill with the particular patience of a woman who has long since stopped expecting mealtimes to be tidy and had looked at this small, furious person in the high chair with the specific love that catches you off guard in the middle of ordinary mornings. The love that is not grand or dramatic, but is simply so large and so constant that your chest aches a little with it. Seo Yun had left for school in a hurry, backpack half-zipped, one sock marginally darker than the other, entirely unconcerned by both. She had kissed Helen on the cheek with the efficiency of a 7-year-old who has places to be and people to organise when she gets there, and the door had closed behind her, and the apartment had shifted into its daytime quiet. That particular golden quiet of a home that is full even when it is empty. Sua had an early site meeting and had left before 7, still pulling her hair back as she came through the kitchen, pausing at the door to accept the coffee Helen pressed into her hand without a word, the way she always did, the offering so familiar now that neither of them remarked on it. Sua had taken the cup with the ease of a young woman who had stopped being surprised by being taken care of and had begun, quietly and without announcement, to rely on it. She had looked at Helen over the rim for just a second. That look that sometimes passed between them in the mornings, brief and private. The look that meant, I know what this is and I'm not taking it for granted. And then she was gone, boots loud on the hallway floor, the door pulling shut behind her. And then Minho. He had kissed her at the door, properly, the kind that requires a moment to complete, not the abbreviated version that busy mornings produce. He had his coat on, his briefcase in one hand, the faint smell of the coffee he'd made himself at 6 still on his breath. He had looked at her the way he looked at her sometimes in the mornings, when the light was at a particular angle and there was no performance required of either of them, with an expression that was so completely without artifice that it still, after all this time, made her feel seen in the specific way that only the right person can see you. "Home by 7, he said. "I'll save you dinner," she said. He nodded, touched her face briefly with his free hand, the back of his fingers against her cheek, a gesture so habitual they had both stopped noticing it consciously, and walked toward the elevator. She stood in the doorway and watched him go. Dark coat, straight shoulders. The particular way he carried himself, which had once read to her as cold, and now read as simply his. The composure of a man who had worked very hard to become someone steady, and had succeeded. She watched him until the elevator doors closed.
She had not known it was the last ordinary morning for a long time. She had not known that she was filing it away in the part of the brain that keeps the things that matter. The spoon dropped by the baby, the mismatched sock, the coffee pressed into a daughter's hand, the kiss at the door, without knowing yet that it needed to be kept.
Without knowing yet that she would spend the next several hours holding those small, ordinary images like stones in her palms, pressing them into her skin, using them to stay present and functional and breathing, while the world rearranged itself around her. She had not known. Nobody ever does. The call came at 11:43. The number was Kang International's main office line, and she answered it the way she answered calls she wasn't expecting, with the mild curiosity of someone who assumes it is probably nothing. The voice on the other end was Ms. O, his personal assistant of 9 years, a woman whose professional composure was so reliable it had become something Helen took for granted, the way you take for granted the structural walls of a building. Ms. O's composure was, under normal circumstances, architectural in its solidity. You did not question whether it would hold, it simply held. Her voice on this call did not hold. "Mrs. Kang?" A breath that wasn't quite controlled. "Mr. Kang collapsed during the board meeting 20 minutes ago. He is in an ambulance. They are taking him to Seoul National Hospital. I think they are saying his heart." Her voice broke entirely, cleanly, like something snapping. Helen was already moving before the sentence finished. She did not remember the specific sequence of the next 4 minutes. She remembered Nana Ji Young on her hip, the warm, solid weight of her, the small hand gripping Helen's collar, while she moved through the apartment with the focused velocity of a woman who has spent 2 decades functioning at high capacity inside emergencies. She remembered calling Ji Yun, the words coming out already stripped of everything except essential information. "I need you at my apartment right now. Take Nana Ji Young. I'll explain everything. Please." And Ji Yeon, her Ji Yeon, who had been there from the soju evenings and the rainy nights and the Accra phone calls, who knew the specific weight of "please" in Helen's voice, had said only, "I'm already leaving," without a single question. Not because she didn't have them, because she understood that some moments don't have room for questions. She called Sue R next. The phone rang 4 times, and Helen's mind was already composing itself to leave a voicemail. Measured, factual. Don't panic her unnecessarily. When Sue R picked up, the construction site audible behind her, wind and the distant percussion of work, the sounds of her ordinary Wednesday. Helen told her in 4 sentences, the way you say things when there is no time and no space for cushioning, and the only thing you can offer is the truth, plain and immediate. The construction site sounds stopped. The wind disappeared. "I'm coming," Sue R said, and the call ended. In the silence that followed, Helen stood for one moment in the center of the apartment she had built with this man, the apartment full of his children's drawings and her nursing textbooks, and Sue R's architecture models on the shelf, and the calligraphy brush bracelet charging on the kitchen counter because she'd taken it off to wash dishes. And she breathed. One breath, long and deliberate. The breath of a woman who has been inside crisis before and knows that falling apart is a luxury that can only be afforded later, in private, after the necessary things are done. Then she picked up her bag and walked out the door. Seoul National Hospital. The same hospital. Always, somehow, this hospital. The building that had been the setting for more of this story's most significant moments than any other place on Earth. The hospital where Minho had first stood in a doorway and felt something knock on a door he thought was permanently sealed. The hospital where Nana G. Young had entered the world furious and perfect. The hospital where Helen had spent 20 years learning how to hold the most fragile things without breaking them. She walked through the emergency entrance, and the smell hit her the way it always did. Antiseptic and recycled air, and the particular institutional quality of a place where ordinary time does not apply. And for one disorienting second, she was a nurse arriving for a shift, and then she was a wife, and the difference between those two things had never felt so enormous. Ms. O was in the lobby, composure reassembled into something functional but visibly costing her. Two of Minho's senior staff stood nearby with the specific helplessness of capable people confronted with something that cannot be managed or delegated. The cardiac team came to Helen quickly, the way they come to next of kin, with the language that medical professionals use when they need to be precise and also humane. A difficult combination, one that she had attempted herself hundreds of times from the other side. Cardiac event. Significant. Emergency surgery strongly recommended. They needed her authorization. She processed the clinical terminology with the part of her brain that had been trained for exactly this, that recognized the specific weight of significant, that knew what strongly recommended meant in cardiac language, that could map the information onto outcomes with the accuracy of 20 years in medicine. And alongside that processing, running simultaneously in a register she did not have clinical language for, was the translation. This is serious. He is in danger. The man who followed you to Ghana is lying somewhere in this building, and he needs you to be the competent version right now. She gave her authorization. Her hand did not shake on the form. She had decided it would not, and so it did not. Not because she was not afraid, but because she was a nurse. And nurses learn early that fear and function are not mutually exclusive. That you can be terrified all the way down and still do the thing that needs doing. And that this is not the absence of feeling, but is in fact one of the more extraordinary things a human being can do. She signed. She answered the questions they put to her clearly and completely. She watched the surgical team mobilize with the organized urgency of people who understand that time is not abstract, that every minute is a decision, and she knew that language too, had spoken it herself for 2 decades. She watched them move Minho through the corridor doors with the efficiency of people who are very good at the most critical possible thing. And then the doors closed, and there was nothing left to do. She walked to the surgical waiting room. She sat in the chair closest to the corridor doors, close enough that she would hear them open the moment they opened, not close enough to be in anyone's way. She placed both hands flat on her knees. She looked at the closed doors. And for the first time since the phone call, she stopped moving. The waiting room was ordinary in the specific way that waiting rooms are ordinary, deliberately so, as if the designers understood that the people who would sit here did not need beauty or drama, just neutral surfaces and functional chairs, and the absence of anything that might tip an already fragile composure too far in either direction. Beige walls, chairs built for durability rather than comfort, the kind that hold you adequately without inviting you to relax. A television mounted in the corner playing a program with the sound low enough that nobody could follow it, present only as evidence that the world outside was continuing its business regardless. Fluorescent light, flat and even, casting no shadows, illuminating everything without flattering anything. The specific silence of a place where people sit with their worst fears and attempt to hold themselves together. Helen sat in it and breathed. She thought about the morning, the spoon, the sock, the kiss at the door. She held those images carefully, the way you hold something small and breakable, and she told herself, he is in surgery. The best surgical team in Seoul is doing what they do. You have done everything you can do. Now you sit, and you breathe, and you wait, and you do not fall apart until there is a reason to, and you do not catastrophize, and you hold onto the rope in the dark, because you have held onto ropes in the dark before, and you have always come through to the other side. She was still talking herself through it 20 minutes later when she heard footsteps in the corridor. She looked up. Suah filled the waiting room doorway the way her father filled doorways, with presence, with the quality of someone whose arrival changes the atmosphere of a room without them doing anything deliberate to cause it. She was still in her site clothes, worn work boots dusty from the construction site, dark jeans with a smear of something across the left knee, the Kang architecture jacket with the embroidered chest pocket that she had designed herself and worn with quiet pride since the day the firm put her name on a project. Her hair was pulled back roughly, not the carefully considered version she wore to client meetings, but the functional knot of a woman who had been working when the call came and had not stopped moving since. She had not stopped to change. She had not stopped for anything. She stood in the doorway and looked at Helen with her father's eyes. The same architecture, the same depth, the same quality of seeing everything while showing only what she chose to show. And in those eyes right now, all the choosing had fallen away. She was 25 years old, and she had gotten a father 2 years ago, and she was only now standing in this doorway with her site boots and her dusty jacket and her heart in her throat, understanding with the full force of her body how completely she had claimed him, how much space he had taken up in her without her giving him permission, without her even noticing it happening, the way the best things always do. She crossed the room. She sat in the chair directly beside Helen, not across, beside. The choice was deliberate in the way that says something without saying anything. I am not here to talk. I am not here because I have something useful to offer. I am here because you should not be alone in this chair, and I am the person who is going to make sure you are not. Their shoulders touched. Neither of them said anything. There are things that need to be said and things that don't, and the wisdom is in knowing the difference. Right now, in these chairs, with these doors, with all of this, there was nothing to say. So they said nothing. And the nothing between them was warm and certain and exactly right. This is what family actually is. Not the Sunday dinners, though those matter. Not the celebrations and the photographs and the beautiful moments that get recorded and remembered, though those matter too. It is this, the waiting room. The chair beside someone when there is nothing useful left to do and you stay anyway. The shoulder against theirs at 11 in the morning when you are both afraid and the only honest thing you have to offer is your physical presence. The simple animal comfort of another body close to yours in the dark. Suah had learned this from Helen, from watching her do it for years with every person in this family who needed it. And now she was doing it back, instinctively and without being asked, and Helen felt it land in the precise place that needed landing and thought, she became mine so quietly, I didn't notice until she already was. The room began to fill. Min-jun arrived at 12:15, and Helen heard him before she saw him. His footsteps in the corridor, faster than walking, the specific rhythm of someone who has been moving since they got the news and hasn't stopped. He was 16 now, nearly as tall as his uncle, The baby fat of the boy who had once swallowed a marble long since resolved into the angular, self-conscious features of a young man who was still figuring out what kind of person he wanted to be. He came through the waiting room door and he saw them, Helen and Sua side by side, the closed corridor doors, the specific quality of the room, and his face did the thing that the Kang face does, the thing they all did, where the composure is the first response and the truth comes 3 seconds behind it. His composure lasted approximately 4 seconds, maybe 5. Then it didn't. He sat on Helen's other side. She had the instinct to choose for him, the way she had always chosen for the people in her care, positioned herself so that the space was available and obvious. And he put his face in both hands, and the sounds he made were the sounds of a 16-year-old boy confronting the scale of a love he has never had adequate opportunity to articulate. He loved his uncle, in the specific way that boys love the men who show them what it looks like to be a man worth being. Minho had never lectured him about it. He had simply been it, consistently, in every ordinary interaction. And Min-jun had absorbed it the way young people absorb the things that matter. Not through instruction, but through sustained proximity. Helen put her arm around him. He was almost too tall for it, the way So-yun was almost too big for her lap, and she pulled him close anyway. "He is going to be okay," she said into his hair, with the same quiet certainty she had used in the dark of So-yun's room when the nightmares came. Not because she could promise it. She was a nurse. She knew better than anyone that promising outcomes was a thing you did not do. But because he needed to hear it from someone who meant it. And she meant it. And that meaning mattered even when the promise couldn't be made absolute. Min-jun nodded against her shoulder. Then he straightened, slowly, and rebuilt his composure with the effort of someone laying bricks back into a wall, and wiped his face with the back of his hand and sat up. He did not let go of her hand. Madame Kang arrived at 12:40. The wheelchair was new. She had resisted it for 2 years with the stubbornness of a woman who views physical concession as a strategic defeat. But even she had eventually acknowledged that 85 was a number that made certain demands. And she had accepted the wheelchair with the specific grace of someone who decides that if they must do a thing, they will do it with complete dignity and not 1 inch of apology. She was wrapped in deep blue silk, silver hair immaculate, the kind of woman who would arrive at the end of the world dressed appropriately because she understood that standards were not situational, but were instead the precise thing you held on to when everything else became uncertain. She looked at the waiting room when her attendant pushed her through the door. She looked at all of them, Helen and Min-jun and Sua, Attorney Shin near the window, Ms. O by the door. And she made a sound. Not quite a word. Something that contained everything. The grief and the fury and the love, and the specific devastation of a woman who has buried a husband and a son-in-law and a granddaughter, and has carried those losses in her body for decades, and is not, she is absolutely not, prepared to carry another one. The iron in her spine was visible even in the chair, especially in the chair. She navigated to Sua and reached over and took her hand. No preamble, no explanation. The old woman's hand over the young woman's, papery and warm and absolutely certain. Sua looked down at it. For a moment, her jaw worked with something she wasn't going to say in a waiting room, something she was going to save for later, for a private room, for the conversation with Minho that she had been planning without knowing she was planning it, the one where she told him, properly, what he had given her by simply being her father. By not running from it, by choosing it every day, even when she made it difficult. She turned her hand over beneath Madame Kang's and held it back. The old woman nodded once, satisfied, as if something had been confirmed. Ji-yeon sent a message at 1:15.
She had Nana Ji-young, the baby was fine, she had been given crackers and was systematically deconstructing them onto Ji-yeon's kitchen floor with great contentment. Soo-yeon was still at school. Should she pick her up early? Helen sat with this question. She thought about Soo-yeon's face, the specific quality of her daughter's intelligence, the way she had always understood more than she was given credit for. The 7-year-old who had walked into a waiting room 3 years ago after a Korean Mafia boss was dismantled and assessed the room with the calm of someone who reads atmospheres the way other children read picture books. She thought about what it would mean for Soo-yeon to sit in this room not knowing, and about what it would mean for her to be at school not knowing. And she chose the school and the normal time because 7-year-olds need normal time when everything else is not normal. And because there was nothing Soo-yeon could do here that being at school prevented her from doing later. Pick her up at normal time, she typed. Tell her Appa is at the hospital and we are all with him. Do not use the word serious. Ji-yeon replied immediately. Understood, I love you. Helen looked at those 3 words for a moment. Then she put her phone face down on her knee and looked at the closed corridor doors, and breathed. At 2 o'clock, Soo-yeon arrived. She came through the waiting room door in her school clothes, backpack on her back, one sock still marginally different from the other. The same socks from this morning, Helen noted. The same ordinary morning that now felt like it had happened in a different chapter of a different life. Ji-yeon was behind her, and Helen could see in Ji-yeon's face the careful work of the past hour. The maintenance of normalcy, the choosing of words, the specific labour of being calm for a child when you are not calm. Soo-yeon walked into the waiting room, and she did not run to Helen. She stopped. She took in the room. All these people, these chairs, this particular quality of gathered silence, with the eyes of a child who has always been older than her years in the specific ways that matter. Her gaze moved from face to face, reading each one the way Helen had taught her, the way Minho modelled without knowing he was teaching. She read Madame Kang's spine. She read Min Jun's reconstructed composure and understood that it had recently been something else. She read Sua's hand still held in the old woman's. And then she looked at Helen. Is Appa going to be okay? She asked. Her voice was steady. This was the most heartbreaking thing about it, that a 7-year-old had learned to steady her voice for the hard questions. Helen opened her arms. Soo-yeon walked into them, not running. That was the thing. That was the small, devastating detail that Helen would remember long after everything else softened into general memory. She walked, measured and deliberate, like someone who has decided that if the answer might be hard, they will receive it standing up and they will not rush toward it. Helen held her and breathed her in, the school day smell of her, crayons and outside air, and the specific warm scent of her daughter's hair that she had known since the first afternoon she brought her home from the hospital. And she said, The doctors are taking very good care of him. Because it was true, and it was the most she could honestly give her. And Soo-yeon, who understood the difference between a promise and a true thing that doesn't yet know its outcome, accepted it with the seriousness it deserved.
She climbed into Helen's lap. She was 7 and almost too big for it, and she settled in with the complete authority of a child who has decided that being almost too big is nobody's business but hers. She did not ask any more questions. She reached down and took Helen's hand and laced her fingers through it, and Helen held back, and they sat like that, mother and daughter, the original two, the ones who had found each other in a hospital ward before any of the rest of it was even imaginable, in the middle of the room full of everyone else, and the room arranged itself gently around them. Now stop. Just stop for a moment and look at this room. A Ghanaian Korean woman in her 40s who came to Seoul with nothing but a broken heart and rebuilt herself into the center of a family that love assembled from the most unexpected materials. A 25-year-old architect in work boots who knocked on a door with an envelope and was given tea and stayed. A 16-year-old boy with his uncle's eyes who started all of this by swallowing a marble in a park. An 85-year-old matriarch in blue silk who approved of love over tea and held a young woman's hand in a waiting room without being asked. A 7-year-old girl with mismatched socks who had not spoken for 3 weeks when she came home and now steadied her voice for the hard questions. Every single one of them in this room because of one man, because of his capacity to love, to be changed by love, to open the doors inside himself that he had sealed for 15 years and let the light come through. If that waiting room doesn't tell you everything about what a life well lived looks like, I am not sure what will. If this story is moving through you right now the way I hope it is, take a second and like this video, because we are heading into the most important moments of this entire series, and I need you present for all of it. The surgery lasted 4 hours and 17 minutes. Helen knew the exact duration because she watched the clock on the waiting room wall with the focus of someone who has decided that the numbers are the only thing she can control right now. That watching them move is a form of participation, a way of accompanying him through something she cannot otherwise be part of. 4 hours, 17 minutes. She counted every one. The surgeon came through the corridor doors at 4:58, and the moment the doors moved, the hinge sound, the shift in the air, Helen was on her feet. And because she was on her feet, the entire room rose with her, all at once. The collective instinct of people who have been waiting together long enough that they have become, temporarily, one organism with one held breath. The surgeon's face did the things surgeons' faces do when the news is good. A slight release around the eyes, a fractional softening of the jaw, the specific quality of someone who is carrying relief alongside professionalism, and allowing just enough of the relief to show that the family can read it before the words arrive. Successful. Successful. Recovery expected. He is asking for his wife. The waiting room made sounds that waiting rooms are not designed to receive. Madame Kang closed her eyes and pressed her free hand flat against her sternum, above her heart, and held it there, and her lips moved with something private, a word or a prayer, or simply his name. Min Jun exhaled with the specific sound of something structural releasing, the sound of a load-bearing thing that has been under extraordinary pressure, finally being allowed to rest. Sua turned toward the window, away from all of them, and her shoulders did the thing that shoulders do when a person is trying not to collapse with relief in a room full of people. The slight curl inward, the breath that shakes on the way out, the pause while everything reorganizes itself. Ji-yeon, who had slipped in at some point in the last hour and taken a chair near the door, pressed both hands over her face and made no attempt to be quiet about it. Soo-yeon, who had been in Helen's lap and was now standing, turned and buried her face in Ji-yeon's shoulder. Her small body exhaled. She had been holding so much, this 7-year-old, with her steadied voice and her measured walk and her fingers laced through Helen's for 4 hours and 17 minutes. She had held all of it with a maturity that had no business existing in a 7-year-old. And now she pressed her face into Ji-yeon's shoulder and simply breathed. Helen pressed both hands over her mouth. The tears were there. They had been there since 11:43, contained by the same discipline that had kept her hands steady on the consent form. The same discipline that had functioned inside emergency for 20 years. They were right there, at the surface, ready. She held them, not because she was ashamed of them, because there was one more thing she needed to do first. She lowered her hands. She straightened her jacket. She looked at the surgeon with the composure of a woman who was going to fall apart completely, thoroughly, and without any reservation. Later, in private, when there was no one who needed her to be solid. "Take me to him," she said. The room he was in was quiet except for the monitors, their sounds rhythmic and ordinary, the sound of a body doing the work it is supposed to do. He was pale, the specific pallor of a person who has just been through something serious, the pallor that makes even powerful people look briefly like earlier, younger versions of themselves, before the armor and the authority and the weight of a dynasty accumulates. He had wires and monitors and the hospital's particular talent for equalizing everyone, for reducing the most formidable person to simply a person in a bed, which is perhaps the hospital's most democratic quality. But his eyes were open, and when she walked through the door, they found her. The way they always did. The way they had always done, across hospital corridors and park benches and calligraphy studios and Accra gardens, with the complete, undivided, entirely ungoverned attention of a man who, when she was in the room, saw only her. She crossed to the bed. She sat in the chair beside it. She took his hand in both of hers, cool, slightly heavy, the hand of someone who had just come back from somewhere, and for a long moment, neither of them said anything at all. The monitors kept their rhythm. The room held them. Outside the window, Seoul was moving through its late afternoon with its ordinary indifference. And in here, time had a different quality. Slower, more deliberate, the specific texture of time in rooms where something has just been decided about a life. "I'm sorry," he said. His voice was rough, scraped by the anesthesia, smaller than its normal register. "Don't," she said. "I scared you." "Minho." The way she said his name when she needed him to stop arguing. He was quiet for a moment. Then, "I scared all of you." He turned his head toward the door, toward the corridor, toward whatever he was imagining of the waiting room he had not been in, but which he could feel, somehow, the weight of. "Are they?" "They're all here," she said. "Every single one of them. They have been in that waiting room since noon, and not one of them has left." She paused. She looked at his hand in hers. Madame Kang held Sua's hand for 3 hours. The whole time. She just reached over and took it, and Sua held it back. Another pause. So-yeon sat in my lap and held my hand for 4 hours and 17 minutes, and asked me nothing after the first question, because she knew I had told her everything I could, and she accepted that and just stayed. Her voice wavered, for the first time, on the last word. Stayed. The word that meant everything in this family. "And Minjun," she stopped, swallowed. "Minjun is 16 years old, and he sat in that waiting room and cried, and then composed himself, and then cried again, and I have never, in all the time I have known him, loved him more than I did in that room today." Something moved across Minho's face that was beyond his depleted body's ability to fully express. Something too large for the pale, wired, post-surgical version of himself to contain. He closed his eyes. Behind his eyelids, something moved, briefly, and then he opened them again, and they were very bright. "I need to tell you something," he said. You need to rest. No. His hand tightened around hers. Not urgently. He didn't have that strength right now, but with intention. With the specific deliberateness of a man who has spent 49 years being very careful about what he said and when he said it, and has just spent the past several hours understanding that careful has its limits, that economical has its price, and that he is done paying it. I need to say this now, while I have no armor left, while I cannot reach for it even if I want to. She went quiet. She let him. I have been so careful, he said. My whole life. So controlled. So deliberate. I decided what to feel and when to feel it and how much of it to let into the room, and I was proud of that, Helen. I genuinely believed it was a form of strength. To need nothing. To show nothing. To be the person in every room who is never caught off balance. He stopped. His jaw worked. Lying on that boardroom floor today, waiting for the ambulance, 15 feet from where I just had a conversation about quarterly projections. I wasn't thinking about the business. I wasn't thinking about anything I thought I would think about. He looked at her, and his eyes in the pale hospital light were the most open she had ever seen them, completely without the architecture of control. Just a man. Just a person in a bed. Just the truth. I was thinking about Nana G. Young this morning, dropping the spoon and laughing at it like dropping things was the funniest discovery she had ever made. I was thinking about So-yeon leaving with the mismatched socks and not caring even a little bit. His voice was low, almost private. I was thinking about Sua's face when she thinks no one is watching her, and she lets herself look, just for a second, like she belongs here, like this was always her home. He paused, and when he continued, his voice was even quieter. The way voices get when they are carrying something that has been held for too long. And I was thinking about you at the window in the mornings, before the house wakes up, with your coffee and the river light, the way you look when you don't know anyone is watching, the way you look when you are simply yourself, with nothing to manage and nothing to perform. He looked at her steadily. I have never told you that. How much I love that version of you. How much I love every version of you. I should have said it more. I should have said it constantly. I was being economical with the most important currency I had. She had decided she was not going to cry in this room. She was crying in this room. Not dramatically. She was not a dramatic crier, never had been. But quietly and completely, the way things that have been held a long time release when they are finally allowed to. I am going to say things more, he said, and there was a ferocity in it that the rough, pale voice couldn't entirely contain. The ferocity of a man making a vow on the most honest ground he has ever stood on. I am done being careful with it. With you, with the children, with Sua, with Minjun. You are all going to be thoroughly exhausted by how much I say it. I'm giving you fair warning. She laughed, wet and helpless and real. The laugh that had started everything, reduced to its most essential form. The laugh of a woman who has been frightened to the core and has been given back what she was afraid of losing and is so grateful she doesn't have a better response than this. She brought his hand to her lips and held it there, and he felt the warmth of her breath against his knuckles, and he closed his eyes again, and this time the thing behind them was not grief, but something closer to its opposite. Good, she said against his hand. We will survive it. I know you will, he said. You survive everything. She looked at him. So do you, she said, stubbornly and completely. Don't forget that. The corner of his mouth moved, almost a smile, almost entirely his. His recovery took 3 weeks in the hospital and 6 weeks at home, and those 9 weeks gave the family something that no ordinary stretch of time could have given them: access to the version of Kang Min-ho that existed underneath the dynasty. The man who had built all of it, and carried all of it, and controlled all of it for so long that even the people who loved him most had learned to navigate around the edges of his armor without expecting to be let through. The armor was gone now. Not permanently. He would rebuild some of it inevitably, because some of it was useful, and some of it was simply who he was. But for those 9 weeks, it was gone. And what was underneath it was so completely and thoroughly worth knowing that everyone who encountered it was quietly, permanently changed by the experience. He read to Nana Ji Young from the sofa every afternoon because he could not yet lift her, and the proximity was necessary. His absolute requirement, non-negotiable, stated to Helen on the second day home with the seriousness of a man issuing a directive, and she would crawl to him and pull herself up against the sofa cushion beside his knee and sit there while he read, occasionally reaching up to pat his leg with the checking-in gesture she had developed, the small reassurance she offered to the people she loved, which she had learned from watching Soo-yeon and had adopted entirely as her own. He read her things she was too young to understand. He read her architecture books that Soo-ah left on the coffee table, and business history, and occasionally the Korean poetry he had read privately since he was a young man, and never told anyone about. She listened with the focused attention of a 14-month-old who cannot pass the words, but can feel the voice, who understands that being read to means being held in someone's attention, which is perhaps the most important thing a voice can do. He had the conversation with Soo-ah on a Wednesday afternoon, 3 weeks into his recovery at home, while the apartment was quiet and the Han River was silver in the winter light outside the window. They sat in the living room, the two of them, with tea that went mostly undrunk, and they said the things that had been accumulating since a Tuesday morning 2 years ago, when she had stood in a doorway with an envelope and been given tea. He told her what he wished he had done differently, knowing the answer was nothing, knowing that neither of them could have made different choices with the information they had, but saying it anyway, because some things need to be said, even when they cannot be remedied. She told him about her childhood. Not all of it. Some of it. The parts she had decided, after 2 years of watching this family hold things carefully, that she was ready to share. He listened with the complete attention she had learned to expect from him, without interrupting, without fixing, without doing anything except receiving what she gave him. At one point she said quietly, "She was right about you, my mother. She said you were a good man in an impossible situation. And I spent 23 years being angry at her for saying it, because it made it harder to be angry at you." She looked at her tea. "I'm not angry anymore." He didn't say anything for a moment, then, "I'm glad." "I know," she said. "That's why I told you." He told So-yeon on a Thursday afternoon when she had come to sit with him while he rested, which she did every day after school without being asked, dropping her backpack at the door and coming to the sofa with the matter-of-fact devotion of a child who has decided this is her responsibilities and she takes her responsibilities seriously. That she had saved his life before the surgery ever had the chance to. She looked at him with her enormous, serious eyes, this 7-year-old who had steadied her voice for the hard questions and said, "I know, Appa." Not with arrogance, with the simple confidence of someone who has always understood the weight of what they carry. And he looked at her for a long moment, this child who had come to him through Helen, who had made him a father before he had ever said yes to being one, who had called him Appa so casually that first time that it took him a full 30 seconds to understand what had happened. And he thought, every good thing in the last 3 years began with her. He told Helen on a night in the 3rd week when the apartment was quiet and the baby was asleep and the Han River was dark and silver and the light in the room was low and warm. He told her he wanted to establish a cardiac care wing at Seoul National Hospital, named not for the Kang family, for Emmanuel Osei, her father. The man Min-ho had never met, but had come to know through every generous and unbreakable thing his daughter had inherited from him. The way she made tea for strangers, the way she sat beside people in waiting rooms, the way she documented love so thoroughly that courts could not argue with it. Helen looked at him for a long time when he said this. The room was very quiet. He would have liked you, she said finally. I hope so, he said. They sat with that for a while. The river, the dark, the specific warmth of the room, the steady sound of a man's repaired heart doing its work. He recovered, fully, stubbornly, completely, with the particular determination of a man who has been told by his wife and his 7-year-old and his 25-year-old architect daughter that dying is categorically unacceptable, and who has taken that instruction with the seriousness it was intended to carry. He came back to himself in stages, the way winter comes back to spring. Not all at once, but with accumulating certainty, until one morning the posture was fully his again, and the voice was its full register, and the eyes had their old quality of seeing everything. Except now they saw it differently, with the specific altered vision of a person who has stood very close to losing something and survived. And life resumed. Not the same life. The same life does not resume after something like this. A better one does. Fuller, more deliberate, more awake to its own value. The specific quality of a life lived by people who have stood in a waiting room together and been given back what they were afraid of losing, and who carry that gratitude in their bodies like a permanent reminder of what matters and what doesn't. Are you still with me? Good, because this is where the story makes its final turn. The turn that will finish you, in the best possible way. 5 years. Soo-ah Kang was 30 years old on the morning of her wedding, and she had asked to get ready in the room that had once been the guest room of her father's apartment. The room where she had spent her first night in this family, 2 years before the events of this story, and 5 years before this morning, rigid with grief and the fragile, terrifying hope of a woman who had rung a doorbell and been given tea instead of what she was afraid of. The room had changed. Of course it had. It had her things in it now, her architecture books, organised on the shelf she had put up herself, her drafting pencils in the ceramic cup that had been a birthday gift from So-yeon, who had painted it herself and presented it with the confidence of someone who knows they have done something excellent. The photograph of Oh Yeon-ji sat on the small dresser, as it had for 5 years. Her mother, young and laughing in summer sunlight, the photograph her father had not known she kept. Not gone. Carried. Helen knocked at 8 in the morning. She knocked because Soo-ah was 30 years old, and this was her room, and you knocked, even if the door would be open to you regardless, even if the knocking was really just a formality between 2 people who had long since moved past needing formalities. She heard, "Come in," and she opened the door, and she stopped. Sua was standing at the mirror. The dress was simple, architectural in its precision, clean lines and extraordinary fabric, and absolutely nothing unnecessary. Exactly what you would design if you were a woman who spent her professional life thinking about structure and form and the relationship between function and beauty. She had her father's jaw and her birth mother's grace, and she was standing in the morning light of the room where she had first understood what it meant to be somewhere that would keep her. The most beautiful thing Helen had seen since Nana Ji Young took her first, furious, independent steps. Their eyes met in the mirror, and Helen's face did the thing it did when something was too large for her composure to hold entirely. The slight parting of the lips, the brightness arriving in the eyes before the expression has caught up with the emotion. "Don't," Sua said immediately. The Kang composure, deployed in its most loving application, protecting someone else from starting something that neither of them could afford to start at 8 in the morning before a ceremony. "I'm not," Helen said, which was completely, transparently untrue, and they both knew it. She crossed the room. She came to stand behind Sua at the mirror, and for a moment she simply looked at both of them, their reflections together, this woman in white and herself in deep gold, the dress she had chosen for today, the colour of the Accra afternoon when a terrified man in a dark coat had walked through a garden gate and changed the direction of everything. She placed her hands on Sua's shoulders, the way she had that night in the kitchen, 5 years ago, when she had said, "There is so much room. You are not a complication. You are the person who completed the count of this family." She looked at Sua's face in the mirror. This face she had watched relax over years from the rigid, guarded expression of a woman who was waiting to be disappointed into something open and certain and entirely itself. The Kang jaw. Oh Yeonji's eyes. Something that was purely Sua's own. The dry humour, the careful precision, the architectural way she looked at the world, measuring everything for structural integrity before she committed her weight to it. "Your mother would be so proud of you," Helen said. She said it quietly, the way you say the things that are simply true. Sua's composure did the thing it had been doing more and more often over 5 years of being held and witnessed and given room. It opened. Not dramatically, like a window in a warm room letting air through. "I know," she said. "I feel her today." A pause. She looked at Helen's hands on her shoulders in the mirror. "I feel both of them. Both my mothers." Helen's hands tightened, just slightly, just enough. They stayed like that for a moment. 2 women in a mirror on a wedding morning, one in white and one in gold. The room full of morning light and drafting pencils and a ceramic cup painted by a 7-year-old who was now 12 and had been awake since 6 and was probably already organising something. The moment was complete in itself. It didn't need anything added to it. So neither of them added anything. They simply stood in it and let it be what it was. The wedding was held at a venue overlooking the Han River. Sua had chosen it with the decisiveness of someone who knows exactly why she wants a thing and doesn't require the wanting to be explained, only honoured. The Han River had been the backdrop of her whole second life. It had been outside the window of the apartment where she had first slept in this family, outside the window of the hospital room where she had sat vigil over her father, outside the window where her stepmother stood in the mornings with coffee before the house woke up. It had earned its place at this ceremony. It was as much a part of this family's story as any of them. The room was flowers and candlelight and the specific, warm, slightly chaotic atmosphere of a family that has grown beyond any blueprint. So many people, Such a variety of how they had arrived at this room, such a wildly improbable collection of lives that had somehow agreed to occupy the same story. In the front row, side by side, sat two of the most formidable women in the known universe, which is how Ji-yeon had described them to her partner when explaining the seating chart, and which was, if anything, an understatement. Madame Kang was 85 years old and in deep burgundy silk, which she had selected specifically because it was not black. She had told Helen this directly 3 weeks ago, with the straightforwardness of a woman who has long since stopped softening things, because this was not a funeral, and she intended to dress accordingly. She had attended too many of those. Today she was choosing the other thing. Her silver hair was immaculate. Her posture in the wheelchair was, as always, a rebuke to the concept of physical limitation. Beside her sat Margaret Osei, who had lived in Seoul for 3 years now, in the apartment 2 streets from her daughter's building that Minho had arranged with the same quiet efficiency with which he had once arranged the best family law attorney in the city. Simply, without announcement, because it was the right thing, and he had the means, and he did not see the need for ceremony around a decision that was obviously correct. Margaret had brought her garden with her, more or less. The building management had made a note in the file about the number of plants on the balcony of apartment 4B, a note that Margaret had been informed of and had registered with complete serenity before adding 3 more ferns. She was in yellow and green kente today, which meant Madame Kang was in burgundy and Margaret was in yellow, and between them they looked like royalty from 2 separate and equally serious dynasties who had decided somewhere along the way to become allies. They had, genuinely and completely, through the language of grandmothers, which is universal and requires no translation. The comparison of grandchildren's achievements, the strategic sharing of recipes, the perfectly coordinated campaign of mild pressure that they applied to various family members on various topics without ever formally coordinating it, which was either coincidence or something much more organized that nobody could prove. Both of them were already crying. Neither of them had waited for the music. Ji-yeon came down the aisle first, in deep emerald, because she had been there from the beginning, from the soju and the "I'm too old for love," and the phone call from Accra that she had kept in confidence at enormous personal cost and had never once made Helen feel guilty about. And there was no version of this day, no possible configuration of this family's happiness that did not include her in the most prominent position available. She had been crying since she arrived at the venue. She had made no attempt to stop. Then Nana Ji-young, 5 years old with her father's jaw set in a precise expression of someone who has agreed to do something they regard as only marginally beneath their dignity, and who intends to execute it perfectly, regardless. She had negotiated the flower girl dress. The negotiation had been extensive and had involved specific requirements about the sash colour, which had been accommodated, and about wearing it with her own shoes instead of the ones that came with it, which had been declined after consultation. She was wearing the correct shoes. She was not happy about the correct shoes. She was, nevertheless, scattering petals with the focused precision of a child who does things completely when she commits to them, even things she has registered as objectionable. She reached the front of the room and turned and found Helen at the back, because she always found Helen in rooms, the way very young children always locate the specific person they have decided is their anchor. And she held up the empty basket. Her expression was clear and direct. Done. Executed as requested. You're welcome. Helen pressed her lips together. The laugh was right there. She let just enough of it through that Nana Ji-young saw it and was satisfied. Then Seo-yeon, 12 years old, standing at the front of the room with a sheet of paper that she had been writing and revising for 3 weeks with the seriousness of someone who understands that words matter and that these particular words mattered more than most. She had the posture of her father, straight, unhurried, occupying her space without apology, and the warmth of her mother visible in every line of her face as she looked out at the room with the calm of someone who has been practicing and is ready. She read about doors, about the ones you don't expect to open and don't expect to walk through and find yourself on the other side of, surrounded by people you would not have known how to imagine wanting before they arrived. She read about how families are not always the ones you are handed, but are sometimes the ones you build from the materials available, including and especially the unexpected ones. The envelope at the door, the child who didn't speak for 3 weeks, the man with the carry-on bag, the girl who showed up in work boots. She read about love as a practice rather than a feeling, as a series of daily deliberate choices that accumulate over years into something structural and permanent, and capable of holding enormous weight. She read it in the voice of a 12-year-old who meant every word, which is the most powerful voice there is. There was not a dry face in the room by the 3rd stanza, not one. Madame Kang and Margaret Osei were no longer managing their handkerchiefs. Min Jun, 21 now and at university, and home for this weekend because there was no possibility of not being home for this weekend, was looking at the ceiling with the determined expression of a young man who will not cry in a room full of people and is losing that particular battle decisively. Attorney Shin, who had been invited because she had fought for this family in courtrooms, and that made her part of it whether anyone had formally said so, was crying without apparent concern for her professional reputation. Then the music changed. The doors at the back of the room opened, and Sua stood between her parents. Minho on her left, 51 years old, in the finest suit Helen had ever seen on him, which, given his history with suits, was significant. His jaw was set in the expression he wore when something mattered too much for any expression to be adequate, which meant his face was doing the thing it did on those occasions. Completely still on the surface, everything happening somewhere underneath, where only the people who knew him well enough could see it. His eyes were very bright. He was not blinking often. Helen on her right, 47 years old, in deep gold, her locks down and adorned with the small flowers that Su Yon had requested permission to add at 7 this morning, and which Helen had consented to immediately and without hesitation, because some requests from some people you simply say yes to. The calligraphy brush bracelet was on her wrist, the one from the rooftop, on the night everything became real, the night he had said, "I am asking you to let me love you the way you deserve to be loved." She never took it off. She had stopped noticing it, the way you stop noticing the things that have simply become part of you. And Sua in the center, white dress. Her mother's photograph tucked into the bouquet, Oh Yeonji, young and laughing in summer sunlight, carried into the room where her daughter was beginning the next part of her life. Both arms linked through her parents. Her face the most settled, most certain, most completely herself it had ever been. They walked, the 3 of them, together, down the aisle between all the people that love had gathered. And it was so many people. This family had become so many people, through so many unexpected doors, and Tuesday morning doorbells, and park benches, and Accra gardens, and waiting rooms, and calligraphy classes, and one small marble swallowed by an 8-year-old in a park who started everything. All of them standing, all of them watching this walk, this particular arrangement of 3 people, this proof of everything it is possible to build from improbable materials and consistent love. At the altar, Daniel stood. He was 32, a structural engineer who understood load-bearing things, who had fallen in love with the intelligence behind an architectural plan before he met the intelligence behind it, who had sat across from Kang Min-ho 6 months ago in this building and received the kind of father's approval conversation But people who have not had it cannot fully imagine. He had passed, not by being impressive. Minho was not impressed by impressive. He had been impressive his whole life and knew its limits. But by being honest, and by loving Suar in a way that was specific and detailed and grounded in who she actually was, rather than who anyone imagined her to be. He was holding very still in the way that the men of this family held still when everything was happening inside them. Until he saw Suar. Then he was crying. And because he was crying, Minho was not the only man in the room doing the thing that men of his generation and culture were not supposed to do. And the room loved Daniel for it, entirely and immediately and without reservation. They reached the altar. Minho took Suar's hand. He held it for a moment, just long enough to say the thing he said, quietly, only for her. Your mother raised someone extraordinary. I am going to spend the rest of my life making sure she knows I know that. He held her gaze. Both of them, he added. Both your mothers. Suar's jaw was set. The Kang nod came, sharp once, controlled. Her mother's nod, her father's nod, entirely her own. He placed her hand in Daniel's, and Helen, standing beside him, felt his hand find hers. She looked at him. He was looking at Suar, and his face, in this moment, was the face she had first truly seen on a park bench in Seoul. Completely open. The architecture of control and distance entirely absent. Just the man underneath. The man who had followed her to Ghana with one carry-on bag and a certainty so complete it had no room for doubt. The man who had woken up in a hospital bed and decided, with the ferocity of someone who has just understood what they were about to lose, that he was done being economical with love. She squeezed his hand. He squeezed back. He did not look at her. He was watching Suar, and the squeeze was its own thing. The language they had developed over years of being in rooms together, the private conversation that happened in the spaces between words. It said, I see this too. I feel this too. This is what we made. Look at what we made. She looked. The ceremony was everything a ceremony should be, and nothing it didn't need to be. The vows were specific and unperformative, and so stripped of performance that they were almost uncomfortable in the way that genuinely true things sometimes are, the way they leave nowhere to hide. Daniel's voice broke twice. Suar's broke once, on the word home, which arrived in her throat differently than she had expected, and she had not anticipated that particular word being the one to break her, and it did, cleanly and completely. And she let it, because this room was the safest room she had ever stood in, and she did not need to protect herself in it. When they turned to face the room as married people, for the first time, in the full recognition of everything that had led to this particular moment in this particular room, the sound the room made was the sound of something completing. Not ending. Completing. The way a chord completes when the final note arrives. The way a structure completes when the keystone is set. The way a family completes when the last person who was always supposed to be there finally finds the door. The reception was golden, warm, full of the specific, beautiful disorder of a family that has grown too large for any room to fully contain and has long since made peace with the overflow. Nana Ji-young removed her flower girl shoes 17 minutes after the reception began. Helen had the timestamp, having timed it as a private exercise, and padded around the reception in her socks with the freedom of someone who has done their duty and is now off the clock. Nobody made her put them back on. They had all made their peace with Nana Ji-young's relationship with footwear over the past 5 years. It was one of the things you simply accepted.
So-yeon danced with Min-jun, who was 21 and home from university, and had grown into someone that Minho looked at sometimes with the specific expression of a man who is proud of someone and wants to say it more clearly than he yet knows how. They danced with the easy familiarity of cousins who have shared the same tables for years, who have been in the same waiting rooms and the same holiday gatherings and the same kitchen on Sunday mornings when everyone arrived at the same time and the apartment was briefly too loud and completely perfect. Margaret Osei danced with Ji-yeon, and the two of them were spectacular in the specific way of women who dance like nobody is watching them, and are not wrong to do so. Madame Kang watched from her table with the expression of someone who would like to be on that floor and is choosing, with dignity, not to be. But her foot was moving slightly under the table, in a way that she would deny if questioned. And then the music changed, slowed, the tempo dropping into something intimate, something that asks couples to find each other in the room and close the distance. Minho appeared at Helen's shoulder. He had lost his jacket somewhere in the past hour. She had watched it happen, watched him remove it and drape it over a chair with the quiet relaxation of a man who is happy enough to let the formality fall away. And his bow tie was undone, the top button of his shirt open, the most dishevelled she had seen him in public in 5 years. He looked, she thought, like the finest version of himself. The version that only appeared when the armour was down and the evening was warm and there was nothing left to manage or protect or control. "Dance with me," he said. "You hate dancing," she said. He looked at her with the look he used when she said things he found technically inaccurate. "I hate dancing with people I don't care about," he said. "With you, it has always been different."
She looked at him for one more second. Then she took his hand. They moved to the center of the floor and the room, with the collective intelligence of people who have spent years learning to read this family, learning which moments were private and which were shared, and which were both simultaneously, softened around them. Other couples joined the floor, providing natural cover. The lighting shifted to gold. The Han River glittered beyond the windows, vast and silver and indifferent and beautiful. The same river it had always been, the backdrop of everything. He held her the way he had learned to hold her. Not possessively. He had never been possessive despite everything, had always understood that she was not something to be kept, but someone who chose to stay, and that the choosing was the only thing that mattered. Not performatively, simply with the complete, unhurried attention of a man who is exactly where he wants to be, and knows it, and has stopped pretending that knowing it is not the greatest privilege of his life. Her head against his jaw, his hand warm and steady at her back, the smell of his cologne and the faint warmth of his skin, and the sound of his heartbeat, which she could hear if she was close enough, which she was, which she had been listening for since a hospital room, and found steady and certain and entirely itself. The music played. Around them, Nana Ji-young in her socks attempting to teach Madame Kang a dance move she had learned from So-yeon, who had learned it from a video. The old woman watching the demonstration with the focused assessment of someone taking it seriously, her foot under the table giving it away. Margaret Osei and Ji-yeon now at the table together, laughing about something that had started as a story and become something funnier the further it went. Ji-yeon's laugh audible even over the music. Min-jun and So-yeon at the edge of the floor. So-yeon trying to teach him something new. Min-jun executing it with the enthusiastic inaccuracy of someone who genuinely does not care if he looks foolish. Which was new for him. Which was wonderful. And by the window, still in their own world, the Han River silver behind them through the glass. Daniel and Sue are, his hand at the small of her back, her face tilted up toward him. Two people who are not yet used to being married and are discovering that it feels exactly like what they thought it would feel like, except warmer and realer and better. For a long time, in the center of all of this, Helen and Minho simply danced. Neither of them said anything. The music held them, and the room held the music, and the night held the room, and somewhere outside Seoul held its million stories with its ordinary, magnificent indifference. And in here, in this gold and candlelight, one of those stories was arriving somewhere it had been moving toward from the very beginning. Then he said it, into her hair, quiet enough to be only hers. You told Ji-yun you were too old for love. She closed her eyes. I remember, she said. You were 42 years old and standing in a park in Seoul, he said, and you had thought about it carefully and arrived at a logical conclusion, and you were very certain about it. He paused. Ji-yun laughed at you. She was right to, Helen said. She was, he agreed. You were catastrophically wrong. His arm tightened around her. Not much, just enough to make the closeness of him more present. You opened a door one rainy night and brought home a child who wasn't yours by blood and became her mother by every other measure that matters. You sat on a park bench. You went to a calligraphy class. You stood in a parking garage in bare feet at 6 in the morning. He said it the way he always said the things that mattered, without drama, simply, like he was listing the facts of a case that proved itself. You flew to Ghana with a secret, and I followed you there with one bag and a certainty that embarrassed me with how complete it was. You opened a door on a Tuesday morning to a young woman with my eyes and an envelope, and you made her tea. He paused. You built an entire empire out of love and documented proof and sheer refusal to be defeated. And you sat in a waiting room for 4 hours and 17 minutes, holding everyone together while I was behind closed doors. And you said, I'm going to tell you something. And then you waited for me to be ready. Another pause. You were catastrophically wrong, he said again. In the best possible way. In the only way that matters. She laughed. It came out of her fully and without preparation. The laugh, the real one. The one that had been with her since before any of this. The one she had never apologized for and had been right not to. The laugh that had been the first crack in 15 years of careful walls, and which had become, over 7 years of this particular life, the sound that meant home to everyone who loved her. It filled the space around them, warm and uncontained and completely itself. And the people nearest to them on the dance floor looked over and smiled, without knowing exactly why. Because the sound of someone laughing like that in a room is contagious in the way that only genuine things are. Catastrophically, she agreed against his chest. He held her. The music moved through its final measures. I will spend the rest of my life being grateful, he said. She pulled back, just enough to look at him, to see his face. This face that she had been reading for 7 years and was still discovering. The face of a man who had been sealed for 15 years and had let her in. Not all at once, not easily, but completely and without reservation and with everything he had. She looked at him and thought about rain and a hospital corridor and a park bench and a calligraphy class and Accra and a waiting room and a Tuesday morning doorbell, and a rooftop, and a dance floor in the middle of everything they had built. Min Hin-ho, she said. Yes? I love you in a way I have never had adequate language for. She held his gaze. I don't expect to find the words. I've stopped looking for them. I just wanted you to know that the thing I feel doesn't fit in language, and I think that's correct. I think that's how it's supposed to be. He looked at her for a moment with the expression she had earned over years, the one that was entirely ungoverned, the full, real smile that had taken months to see the first time, and which she still received like the specific privilege it was. I know, he said quietly. I feel the same. I felt it the first time you laughed in that treatment room, and I had no idea what to do with it, and I stood in a doorway trying to decide to leave, and could not. He shook his head slightly. I could not. I have never been able to leave, since that moment. I know, she said. I know you couldn't. That's why I let you stay. You flew to Ghana, he said. I came back, she said. You always do, he said. So do you, she said. Stubbornly, completely, with one bag and no return ticket booked. Don't forget that part. The laugh that came from him was real and full, and belonged entirely to this room, this night, this version of himself that had taken 46 years to fully arrive at. She heard it and thought, this is what I would give everything to keep. This exact sound, this exact room, this exact life. She pressed her face against his chest, closed her eyes, listened. His heart, steady and certain, repaired and healed and beating in the dark beneath her cheek, the way it had been beating beside her in the dark for 7 years. The most ordinary, extraordinary sound in the world. Around them, their family, a daughter in white and her new husband by the window with the river behind them. A 5-year-old in socks, still negotiating with an 85-year-old matriarch about a dance move. A 12-year-old and a 21-year-old on the edge of the floor, laughing. A grandmother in yellow kente and a grandmother in burgundy silk, side by side in the front row, like the royalty they were. A best friend who had laughed at the right moment 7 years ago and been right. And at the centre of it all, turning slowly in the gold, a woman who said she was too old for love. And the man who spent 7 years proving, one ordinary, extraordinary day at a time, how completely wrong she had been. She had come to Seoul with a broken heart and a plan to survive. She had not been looking for any of this. She had been standing in the rain outside a hospital, holding a child that wasn't hers by blood, and telling herself that some doors close forever. She had found all of it. And standing in this room, inside the life that love had assembled from rain and park benches and calligraphy classes and midnight flights and one Tuesday morning doorbell, and 10,000 ordinary days of choosing each other again, she understood completely and permanently the thing the rain had not shown her. The thing the park bench had suggested, but not confirmed. The thing that had been becoming true in her all along, through every hard thing, and every waiting room, and every moment of staying, when leaving would have been so much safer. She had not been too old for love. She had been exactly old enough for it. Old enough to know what it cost. Old enough to understand what she was choosing. Old enough to recognize the difference between the love that arrives when everything is easy and the love that stays when everything is hard. The love that sits in the chair beside you. The love that follows you to Ghana. The love that makes tea for strangers. The love that documents itself so thoroughly that the world cannot argue with its reality. old enough to build it right, from the right materials, with the right person, into something capable of holding the weight of real life. Cardiac events and Tuesday morning doorbells and secret daughters, and courtrooms and mismatched socks and spoons dropped on kitchen floors, and babies who take their first steps toward you with the pure, furious certainty of someone who has already decided where they belong. Old enough to know that the best love is not the love that completes you. It is the love that witnesses you. The love that says, I see exactly who you are, including all the parts that have been broken and rebuilt. And I am choosing you anyway, completely, without reservation, every day, for as long as I get. The music ended. They stood still in the middle of the floor for one moment after it did, neither of them moving, both of them simply present in the last note's echo, in the warmth of the room, in the specific golden light of a night that would be remembered. Then Nana Ji Young appeared at Helen's leg, having navigated across the floor in her socks with the focused determination of someone on a mission, and tugged on her dress. Helen looked down. Her youngest daughter looked up at her with the jaw of her father and the eyes of her mother, and the absolute confidence of a 5-year-old who knows she is the center of the universe and has no reason to doubt it. Omma, she said. Madam Kang says she will try the dance move. Behind her, across the room, the 85-year-old matriarch caught Helen's eye. Her expression was dignified and unbothered, and completely gave nothing away. Helen looked at Minho. He looked at her. They both looked at Madam Kang. And the laugh, the full, unashamed, room-filling laugh, came out of both of them at the same time, their voices finding each other in it the way they found each other in everything. Outside, Seoul blazed with its million lights, as it always had. Loud and indifferent and magnificent, and full of a million stories happening simultaneously in a city that does not pause to acknowledge any single one of them. But in this room, in this golden light, in the middle of this family that love built from the most improbable materials imaginable, one story arrived. Not at its ending. At its home. 7 years ago, a woman stood in the rain outside a Seoul hospital and told herself she was too old for love. She was wrong. She was wrong in a way that took 7 years to prove and is still being proven. In ordinary mornings and waiting rooms and dance floors and Tuesday doorbells, every single day. You are never too old. The door you think is closed is not closed. It is waiting for someone stubborn enough to knock on it and patient enough to stand in the rain until you open it. If this series has lived in you, if you have been here from the rain to the dance floor, from part 1 to this final night, then this channel is your home. Subscribe, like, and share with someone dear to you. Leave a comment. Tell me which moment across all 4 parts broke you open. Tell me which line you'll carry with you. Tell me which scene you'll never forget. I read every word. I cherish every one. This has been the story of Helen and Minho. It is finished. It is whole. Just like them. Thank you for staying.